I grew up here in Austin. I must have been about 9 years old when my father took me, I think he took me to the Villager, which is a small community newspaper. It used to be here in East Austin. He says it was the Argus, and I looked it up. That's really old. But I remember he took me to a newspaper publisher here, and I had a poem published. When I was little, I wrote poetry, and I wrote up through high school. I wrote poetry, and I became a writer, but I didn't really keep up on the poems. So I'm so glad that I know you. So glad that I found you on Facebook. You are a magnificent poet.
Thank you.
I had a previous guest tell me when I complimented him on his writing, he said, "You're gassing me up, you're gassing me up." I don't even know what that meant. And I told him I don't gas people up. I tell them what I see, and you are magnificent. I want you to introduce yourself, and then we'll talk much more about your poems, where they come from. But I want to know who you are. And I want to say this. This is a no modesty zone. I've done some reading on you, and people need to know who you are. So introduce yourself to us.
Yeah, so I'm KB. I'm a Black trans writer. I write a lot about a myriad of topics that I see that impact me and others around me. I'm from Texas, so I write a lot about Texas and how it was growing up with all of the identities that I have in Texas. I write about community, my friends, like a lot of social situations, but a lot of like Texas politics, things that I know and have seen, impact people I love, sometimes positively, most times negatively, right? Climate change and reproductive rights and police brutality, things like that. I've been writing. Writing is like the thing that I've done, I guess, like as a practice the longest. I have been writing some form of something like creative since I was like 7. But like as a career, more so like consistently since 2019.
Where'd you grow up? Where were you born?
Fort Worth, Texas.
Fort Worth.
So not at all far from Austin, and in the Dallas area for people who don't know the area. I only ever lived in Fort Worth until I was 22. I also went to college there at Texas Christian University. And then I moved really just to see like, is there a place in which I could like be freer with like identity wise? I wasn't quite feeling, or I was feeling like a lot under the guise of like, or under the gaze of like family and like family expectations. And I really had to kind of like get away from that in order to figure out like who I was. And it's like no love lost or anything, but I was really like, I gotta be around. I can't always be like the only one as far as like queerness and transness go. And I know that there are other people who will accept all parts of me and not just some. So moved to San Marcos for a year. While I was in San Marcos, I spent a lot of time in Austin. So I was like, why not just move to Austin? Yeah. One of my friends just happened to be moving here. So it just felt like kind of right time. And I've been here since.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to back up though.
Yeah, let's do it.
We're going to back up because I knew you were going to be modest, but I'm not going to let that happen. So I'm just going to read what it says here on the back of your latest. This is your latest publication, right? We're going to talk more about your published works because you're a prolific writer. You're prolific.
Thank you.
And a lot of it appears you've done yourself in terms of getting it out. I learned a term from you, chapbooks.
Yeah.
I had to look that up. I didn't know. What's a chapbook?
Yeah, it's just short books. So like when I say I have a poetry chapbook, I mean I have a book that is under 50 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is from your book. KB Brookins is a Black, queer, and trans writer, cultural worker, and artist from Texas. Their chapbook, How to Identify Yourself with a Wound, won the, is it Saguaro Poetry Prize and was named an ALA Stonewall Honor Book in Literature. KB's poems and essays are published in Poets.org, Huffington Post, American Poetry Review, and elsewhere. They have earned fellowships from PEN America, Civil Rights Corps, and Lambda Literary, among others. KB's debut memoir, Pretty, will arrive in 2024, and they are a 2023 National Endowment of the Arts Fellow. Okay, let me repeat that. A 2023 National Endowment of the Arts Fellow. What is that?
Yeah, so the National Endowment of the Arts, NEA, like gives away creative writing fellowships every year, and they alternate years between poets and prose writers. And they choose 35 or so people every year. It's pretty competitive.
Nationally?
Yeah.
Yeah. 35 people.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what do you do within that when you're honored with that? What does that mean?
I mean, mostly it's like money, right? So every fellow gets around 25 grand. And then also kind of like bragging rights. Like I think it's like a kind of check mark of like, we see what you're doing. It's usually for emerging, quote unquote, emerging artists, right? And also like just support from the NEA with the things that you do. They kind of become your like cheerleader.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's impressive.
Yeah, thank you.
And people need to know that. And we have a poet like this right here in our city. So congratulations on all that.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
I also want to congratulate you. You were recently married.
Yes,
So
it's true.
yes, there's a lot of excitement
Yes.
in your life, it seems like, which I think, I don't know you well, we just met, but it seems like it might be a little while coming, and so I'm thrilled for you. I'm thrilled for you. It's exciting. I've been a little bit nervous about this interview, and I get nervous. I don't typically get that nervous, but the topic, some of the topics that I want to talk about, I was a bit nervous because I don't want to say the wrong thing, and I don't want to offend you, and I don't, we kind of live in a society right now where we're learning. When we talk about being woke, that's a pretty beautiful thing. We're waking up to things that we didn't grow up with, that we didn't talk about, that we don't understand. Part of the reason I do this show is because I'm a Black woman, and we have been, as Black people, so misrepresented, so misunderstood. So I feel a little bit ahead of the curve when we're talking about issues of gender, sex, and I sometimes compare it to our experience as Black people, but it's not. It's different. It's similar, but it's different too. There's a lot I'm learning. So if I say anything that's offensive, please forgive me. Just correct me, and know that I'm trying. I think a lot of people in my generation were facing new things with regard to gender, and it's a lot. So you were talking about your poem topics, and I read through your book. I made a list of some of the topics: race, abortion, politics. You mentioned sexuality, love, capitalism, the Texas ice storm, the Will Smith slap. I mean, it runs the gamut. The topics. Where does your poetry come from? What is your process for penning your poems?
I mean, it's a hard question in the sense that I think like it depends, right? I think my answer for now is different than my answer like 2 years ago, for example, just because like more things have happened since then. I think it's like I see poetry and really writing in general as like an archival method. I'm just talking about like what it's like to live, in 2013, or like most of this book actually was written in 2021. So like what was it like to live, what is it like to live in this time? Well, what felt most pressing for me is, okay, we just had an ice storm. Okay, we're in a pandemic. Okay, like we have all of these laws kind of coming out of a place of ignorance and a place of like misrepresentation of trans people, of Black people, of queer people. And like a thing that I get now that I'm in this place, that I wanted to be in for so long, of like, I'm in a community of writers. I'm, getting recognition and things like that. I think like a thing that I didn't expect is like for people to like almost feel sorry for me when I tell them I'm like from Texas, right? Like they'll just be like, oh, like, because so much of the literary establishment is like housed in like New York, LA, like these places that seem on the surface more progressive, right? Politically. But I'm like, you still have your own issues, right? So it's not like there is no perfect city, at least not in the US that I know of, right? So I wasn't expecting that. And I think with this book, really, I was trying to introduce people to like, what is Texas like? The good, the bad, and also the maybe in between, where like I'm having a good time and then like I'm having a good time and like also this political thing is happening, like multiple things happening at the same time, because that's just how we live our life, right? So like I wanted to like almost overwhelm this book with like different topics, because I'm like, well, it's not like, that slap happened in like isolation to other things, right? And like I also think it's important for me to be representing, like when I'm talking about transness, I'm also talking about blackness, because those things like exist at the same time for me. So with this book, I mean, I'm a very project-based writer, so I see kind of like a book as like a kind of constellation of like my concerns at any given time, right? So I feel like this book that just came out is like a snapshot really of like my 2021, like what my skill level was at that time, what was most pressing to me at that time, and also like sometimes the poems just like choose me before I choose them, really. And by that, really, I mean like I'll have an idea and it'll just need to be written down. Like I'll feel like almost dissatisfied, like if I don't at least try it. Right. And I think really like any artist with any art practice will tell you, like art is about trying, seeing if you can like pull it off, right? And seeing what you have to say. And if I'm surprised by what I'm saying, then I know that I need to continue speaking, if that makes sense.
If you're surprised by what you say, that's how you know you need to keep speaking. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It also makes sense when you say that the art or the poems sometimes choose you. I can relate to that. I didn't say the name of this is called Freedom House.
Right.
Tell me about that. Why is it called Freedom House?
Yeah, I mean, that dates back to before I even really started on the poem. So like when I first moved to Austin in 2018, when I moved here, I was in a kind of community group of writers. It was like women and non-binary writers of color locally. And one thing that we had to do like month to month was like lead a workshop, right? And this was before I like considered myself like a teacher, a workshop facilitator, or anything like that. But it was like a way of kind of giving back to the group, like, oh, okay, you have someone leading you and you are also leading at different points. And so a thing that I wanted to do my kind of workshop group on was like social justice and art, like where do those things collide? And I think the question I posed to the room was like, if freedom was a house, how do we make sure that art is like one of the tools that builds the house, right? Like, how do we make sure that on this like road to freedom, because all of us were very like concerned with different issues, right? How do we make our art useful to social movements, right? And I gave some examples of artists doing that, right? Like I'm thinking about the Black arts movement, like all of the 1960s. It's like impossible really to talk about, civil rights and what was happening at that time without talking about James Baldwin, without talking about, Toni Morrison, without talking about other writers who were like existing during that time. And writing about what it was like and introducing people really around the globe as to like what it was like to be Black in the US in the 60s, right? So I was like, so how do we do that? How do we go even past like just introducing people to the issues, and also like our words are galvanizing people into change, or galvanizing people into like wanting to know more about insert topic, right? And that seemed to really like resonate with the people in the class. And then people from that class, we were talking to me about it, and they'd be like, Freedom House, whatever. And I'm like, Oh, I actually like that title. Let me like try to write into that. So, for a number of years though, I kind of didn't feel like ready to write into it in the sense that I feel like I still had things to learn. Like on a skill level, I need to learn about like poetry, read more poetry to see like what has come before me and what can I do that's like my unique thing and like find my voice on the page and also find a bit and learn a bit more about myself. You know, I didn't start the physical part of my transition until 2020. And like
That's recent.
yeah, yeah. And when I tell people, they usually like, oh, it feels like you've just kind of always been this way. And I'm like, well, yeah, I have always been this way, but it didn't like look like that on the outside, at least until 2020-ish, right? So, yeah, I mean, like the idea kind of planted itself in 2018, and then I like actually started writing into it in 2021. And then when I like had these poems that felt like they were talking to each other, no matter like how far in subject matter they were, I was like, these feel like they belong. Okay, how do I organize them? Well, I've already called this a house, so let me organize it by rooms, you know, and think about like, so what happens in a kitchen, right? A kitchen table is often when we have like hard conversations. What happens in a living room? What happens in a bedroom? Things like that.
Yes. So we want to hear some of your poetry and continue this conversation. I came, you invited me to your home. Thank you. And we sat outside in your beautiful backyard that has the coolest barn in it. But anyway, we sat out and talked for a little bit, and you read a couple of poems.
I like legally changed my name, I think last year it was. And how names are like very cultural, but also like it's kind of a name someone else chooses for you. So sometimes people come to a crux like I did where I'm like, this name will no longer fits me, so I want to change it. And sometimes there's like mourning associated with that. And yeah, it's just like, I think ultimately about defining yourself. Indignant, I demand the panelists say my name. I'm begging my psyche to let me tell homies my new name. I put up with a name because it feels too much like home. New friends dap me up, and crowds of people call my name. The cashier can't hear me when I say it isn't hard to correctly spell my name. 2 letters of secrecy, one for knowledge, one for fame. Baseline, it is my only name. I can't say it any clearer. In the mirror, I do not see a name. I see a face with many visions of hearing my name different. I hope my lineage knows I'm respectful of the name they've given. On legal papers, I'm ignorant to what I see on the page. Say my name, but only if you let it change for me. I'm dead, as in I don't live for you anymore. I birth myself into my own name.
That poem is powerful. Tell me what it means. Talk to me about that poem.
Yeah, so names have a lot of significance. My name came from my uncle. He named me. My previous name that I don't go by anymore. And yeah, I was thinking about how hard it's been really to like just change, like transition from one name to another, and how it almost feels like for some people that have like for the first like 24 I guess years of my life like knew me by one name to like change to another one, it just like felt like hard for some people. And I was like myself trying to process that and be patient, and also feeling like, well, a name is actually something that I want to choose at this point in my life, right? And I think I should be allowed to do that, right? And also, it's hard to explain that change to people who have only like known me by KB, right? And then I also was like kind of preparing myself for the wedding that I just had and being like, there are probably going to be two names in circulation, and how am I going to deal with that, right? And it's not like luckily, at least for my family, it's not like a malicious thing or anything. It's like more so like we're still going through our own transition of like seeing you as the person that you are versus the person that like we expected you to be. So just like processing kind of both of those things through that poem, and also talking about like how there's, for me at least, no dichotomy between like my name, my dead name, and like my chosen name. It's like more like malleable than that.
When you were reading this poem, I in my heart, I felt like, the word loss kept coming up, not just for someone like you, but yes, the people around you. Do you talk to your family? Is there a sense of loss with regard to your transition? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, sure, in some people's eyes, it's like a grief of like, we're kind of losing a daughter. But I'm like, well, you're now gaining another child, right? And this is the person that I've actually been. And you'd rather know me as this person than a person that I'm not, right? It feels like painful, especially when you're doing it for a string of years, to act like somebody that you're not, right? And would you rather me be in pain or you feel a little awkward just making an adjustment, right? Like, I think there's one choice here that is clearly better. So I try to be like, I understand. It's like, now you have to adjust your view of me, but this new view is going to be an actually like honest view, and actually like a one, yes, and a one where we can actually be closer to each other, because now I can like trust you to like actually see me, and trust you to like be flexible. I mean, like, we as people change over time, right? I even talk to people who are like, the eldest daughter of their family or something, or like they are, going into a job field that their parents didn't expect them to go into. Like, I'm an artist, but my family expected me to be a doctor,
Yes.
Where it's like, well, either that family is going to push you away by continuing to like project a like view of you that doesn't exist, or they're going to be able to be close to you and get even closer to you by seeing you like as what you are and like what makes you happy, right? So I see those things as similar. And the first thing that you like when you meet a new person, the first thing that you learn is their name. So it's just like a sign of respect to call someone by their name, to call someone by when you're referring to them in the third person, like the pronouns that they want to be referred to. It's just like, it's a matter of like me choosing my personhood, and it's like, either you are going to choose to see me, or you're going to choose to create a barrier between us, really. So
Yeah, those are the kinds of things that we're learning. You just mentioned pronouns. I'll be 52 next month, Scorpio season, and yeah, growing up, we never said our pronouns. I mean,
it just assumed,
yeah, and we all agreed as society, this is what we did, and so even that now, it's stepping outside of my comfort zone when someone asks what my pronouns are. I mean, I don't have a problem saying it, but even thinking about writing it, or not knowing in situations, is this something I should say? So we're all just kind of, I wish and I hope that people are going with that flow, and until, because you're right, it's all in evolution. How would you feel about reading a poem right now? Do you mind reading this one?
Yeah.
The structure of it blew my mind as I read it. I read it pretty slowly, and it's beautifully constructed. So I'm going to ask you to read it.
KB's origin story. I was born a weary son painted into a family unit. I can't fit in, but I do fit jeans if I squeeze enough. I pain myself with laughter when someone asks, "Whose baby is this?" I sleep in a tunnel of judgments I can't kick. I was born a jury daughter, crashed into a tiny parked car. In the impact, my feelings sprawl all over the navy leather passenger seat. This can't be a wonderful scene, the navy leather passenger seat, and my feelings sprawled all over. A tiny parked car crashes. In the impact, I was born a jury daughter. In a tunnel of judgments I can't kick, I sleep. Whose baby is this? With laughter, when someone asks enough, I pain myself to fit in. And I do fit jeans if I squeeze paint into a family unit. I can't be born a weary son.
And as you read this, the beginning is the end is the beginning. It's just beautifully put together. How did this poem come to be? Do you remember when you wrote it?
Yeah. So there's a kind of, or there was when I wrote this poem, like a trend of these types of poems called contrapuntals.
Yes.
Where you can like read it from left to right and also right to left, and like this whole thing, right?
I've seen there's a meme or on social media. I've seen it where you can read it forward or backward, and it makes sense. And that's very much how this is.
Yeah, and that's usually like achieved through like what's called parataxis. Like it's just a type of sentence making where like one sentence doesn't depend on the other. And like often when you like write a novel or something, for example, like you use like hypertaxis where like one thing leads to the next, and when you write parataxically, then you can do things like contrapuntals in this kind of like mirror form. So I tried to write a contrapuntal and failed multiple times. I was like, I just really can't do it. Or like I could do it, but I didn't have the patience for it. So I was like, okay, what is a unique take that I can do on something like a contrapuntal? Well, I can do this more like mirror form, where the poem kind of like creates itself after. In this poem, it's like, this can be a wonderful scene, and then after that it's kind of like mirroring the other part of it. This just made more sense to me, I guess, in the like way that I write. And I know that I wanted in this book, and at some point in my life, to write like an origin story, or like be riffing off like what people think of as origin stories, like where did you come from, who are you, things like that. And I wanted a poem that kind of answered but also didn't answer that question, because it's like, for me, it's like, well, depending on who you ask, I'm gonna have a different origin story. And for a lot of people, I think that's probably gonna be the case, but like especially for me, in the way that I navigate gender, in the way that I also feel kind of like forced into either like girl or boy in ways that I like don't really fit either. So trying to talk about that in an origin story, trying to talk about my relationship, at least to both like language as well as lineage. So I don't know. I think it was just me being like, okay, I admit to failure of this certain type of poem, but I'm gonna do my own thing.
You did your own thing, and it works, and you have to see it. So people need to get your book, and when you look at it, like it stays with you. Even the language, I had to look up, I'm a writer. That's what I do. Drury, we don't hear that word in American conversation, it's a beautiful word. Also, I love how at the top you say, I can't fit in, but I do fit jeans if I squeeze enough. And then at the end, I pain myself to fit in, and I do fit jeans if I squeeze paint into a family unit. Jeans there is Genes. That's profound. It's a beautiful piece of work.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, like, when people are, like, being transphobic, they're always like, well, that doesn't genetically make sense. So that's also kind of a nod to, like, well, what you're saying doesn't make sense, actually. But, yeah. And I mean, throughout this whole book, I'm trying to, like have both, like, what feels like making light of something with also like heavy things kind of at the same time, because that's like how we all fit, you know, in the world.
You already mentioned, James Baldwin. This writing is like his. The way that it leaves you feeling, and the topics, you know, the directness of it, direct talk that is also poetic. I wrote Langston Hughes, who I admire him. I love his writing. Gwendolyn Brooks. It reminds me a lot of Gwendolyn Brooks and Nikki Giovanni, the stuff that they've written. I could go on and on naming Black writers, because I think many Black poets and writers, we have that thing that connects us, this lived experience. So, but it's not just that. And your writing even goes deeper because of your personal experience. I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to read one more for us of your choosing.
Okay. Let's see. I mean, now I want to read one of those. It's funny, since it is the oldest poem in here.
The oldest one?
Yeah, so 75% of this, right, is like stuff I wrote in 2021, specifically like May to June of 2021. I have these like sometimes really large writing bursts where I like get a lot done, and then like quiet periods. And this was like kind of after I did like the bulk of the work, like what else have I written that like fits? And this is like a poem I wrote in like 2018. I think like right the moment where I realized I was moving to Austin. So yeah, I have a fondness for this one.
Do you mind reading it?
Yeah. Sin City. It is after a poem by the poet Carrie Fountain called Yes. So just FYI there.
Okay.
I'm tired of taking orders, answering phone calls, wasting time sweeping floors that aren't mine, working for Daniel, David, Lester, being annoyed by Becky, Lindsay, Heather, getting all my customers stolen because I'm not the pretty girl at the bar, leaving clues like an amateur sleuth that I don't want to be here, going to, leaving work broke. I'm just tired. Tired of telling trauma, not today, Satan. Telling grief and depression, not today, Satan. Telling being human and feeling, not any day, but especially not today. I'm tired of being the Black person in your workshop, workplace. Tired of teaching how not to be racist, sexist, stupid. Tired of talking when no one's listening and shaking my head to your senile status quo. In a perfect world, I'd be somewhere away from here. Running swift with my pink slip ready to slit anyone who dismissed me with heart bleeding bliss, and sit in your white ass classroom with a grin, waiting to spit my needed feedback on your Black poem, not wondering if this is where I'm supposed to be. I finally have money to get my AC fixed, lose enough weight for old jeans to fit, then get drinks at Stonewall to reminisce on a time when I wasn't tired, and smoking weed, taking risks were the only sins I embraced. Heart full with love, hands dripping with possibility. Yeah.
It takes courage and vulnerability, I think, to put these words to paper that so many of us relate to, but we're afraid to say. We're afraid to write. Where does that courage come from?
I feel like I don't know, as a person, right, I think I'm pretty introverted. Like, I'm not gonna be like the life of the party type person unless I'm like amongst my friends. Really, like, other than that, if I'm around a lot of people I don't know, I'm very like reserved. But in poems, I feel like I get to be it's just me talking, right? So I feel like much more free, for lack of a better word, to like say what I mean and say like how I feel. And I feel like I'm my most like audacious and like confrontational even like through poems. On 11th Street, Saturday, October 15th. On a street with black art matters coloring the pavement, and pillars with faces of Renaissance-era black artists lift up the highway that tore the city in two. And Black Lives Matter is embroidered in a local shop's window, I see no black people. Unless it's MLK Day, or intentional congregations of underfunded black events, black folk retreat to their faraway corners, speaking a variation of the country's language that sounds like squeaking styrofoam to those who populate 11th Street. My car glides down a road where a venue, a member of the Chitlin Circuit, still stands only 'cause of national designation, everything around it fresh as a new gun. Down a road where a monument honors, through force, black people in Texas. Down a road where homies learned how to play ball, tie their new Christmas shoes, live big despite the meager bounties put on their heads by this city a century prior, and it's nothing but white people. The internet says in East Austin, East 11th is the new SoCo. And my homies say in Austin, our lease is up in February. What is a city if not a slowly rotating thing baking its blackness at the speed of capital? Every street and every city eager for all the wrong reasons reminds me of my skin. It isn't green enough.
Every street in every city, eager for all the wrong reasons, reminds me of my skin. It isn't green enough.
It's based a lot on some research that I was grateful to do during my time at, I was with the city department's sustainability office, like a part of like their kind of climate planning. And through that climate planning, we learned about the Austin's 1928 plan.
Yes.
For people who don't know, two kind of planners, you know, in 1928 were hired by the city of Austin to do what basically it like turned Austin into like segregated city, right? And also is a lot of the reason why we're seeing kind of the phenomenon that we're seeing now in Austin with like gentrification and things like that. I think maybe the city issued an apology for that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. But like now there are anti-displacement kind of things in place, but for a very long time it was just like we don't care if we displace people, right? Like whatever makes money. And it's hard, you know. My wife is from Austin, right? And like we sometimes like just drive around the city. Like I was driving, she was driving, and I was just like looking at things around. And it's very dystopian to see in this very beautified city like what used to be there, right? Or hear about what used to be there, and like there not being any resolve around that, or like not being any like real like people are being like suppressed over like profit. Like profit is like more important, right?
Oh yeah.
Than people, and really
in the name of development,
right?
Which many cities around the country,
right,
you know, development is great,
right,
but at what cost?
Right. Yeah, at the cost of, you know, the black population dwindling, and then people being like, why is this happening? Well, okay, there are a lot of things that have been put in place over time that have made that happen, right? So with this poem, I mean, hopefully you don't have to be from Austin to like understand it. There are lots of like gentrifying cities in the US right now. And also like paying homage to what's been there, and also like bringing up the like mockery of something like a Black Art Matters on the pavement, but it's like there's so much that you could be doing for actual black people that you're not doing, right?
Right.
And you can't just like replace black people with Black Lives Matter signs, you know?
We're done.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So like just talking about, you know, the absurdity of that, and also how it almost feels like there are like two Austins. Like there's an Austin that is like propped up as like, oh, this city is so great, to like, you know, some like people that I've met that are not black, and then I like talk to my black friends and they're like, Oh, well, I'm thinking about moving actually,
Yeah.
right? There's like a statistic out there, I can't remember it off the top of my head, of like the rate in which where like black people move here and then they like move out. I think it's something like 2 years, you know, like people just like come here and they're like, I can't really find footing. Like cultural markers, I think there's like a real devaluation of like, well, I wanna actually feel like I can stay here and everything around me is not gonna be constantly changing in order for people to make it feel like home, right? If you're constantly destabilizing what people can get comfortable with, then people are not gonna be able to stay, especially when the thing that you're destabilizing is like black life, right?
My last question for you, and then before we go, if you'll read one more poem for us, that would be great.
Yeah.
What do you love the most about the person you are?
Such a hard question. But I mean, I love most that I'm living in my purpose, like doing what I want to be doing, which is like sharing art with people, making art and then sharing it with others. There's nothing more fulfilling than like doing a poetry reading and then someone else coming up to me afterwards, like, and being like, you know, I really felt that, you know. It's one thing to like create the art, and it can sometimes feel like very like I'm just writing about myself and like about my friends and about my family. But then like when you actually see the impact of it, it's very rewarding. And also like I think about, you know, the books I make is like books for the kids that inevitably are coming up after me that are gonna like need this. And I mean kid very loosely, like the people 24 and under, you know, that are coming up after me that need to see these things. And I think things would have been so much different, would have went so much different in my childhood had I had books where people were talking about, okay, what it's like to be black and queer in Texas, or oh, what it's like to be queer, you know, young person in the U.S., things like that. So I like that I get to do this. I find it to be an immense privilege. I appreciate that I'm able to just connect with people. So, yeah.
Well, again, it does take, it takes courage to be vulnerable and to share your life and your world. And when you do that, you're absolutely right. Representation matters. And so when people hear your story, the ones who can relate, you are no doubt helping them. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to ask you to read one more poem.
This is called T-Shot number 3, Black Hair. All you really need to know is just about me growing a beard for the first time. I say as a person who just shaved the whole thing off, but yeah.
It looks good both ways.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm trying to just bring it back in so it can be fuller. It's a whole thing. T-Shot number 3, Black Hair. Black hair burgeons through my pores, bringing its small, itchy sores. Cuts through my hands and stubbles up enough to be visible when fitted skin tight to a mirror. One day, I was standing so close you could see each pore, and I'd pluck until every red and black follicle knew no hair was welcomed here. Now they sprout, and I'm foolish with joy at every conjuring of a bush. Every prick rubbing its way through my patchy, happy face. Who will teach me how to shave? YouTube, I guess, till my boys get this far. I wonder if every beard grows like this, into a nest made with oil and hope, into a boy made with oil after they threw away the rope. I guess I'll put that in a search bar too. Did it feel good to stop running from yourself? That's it. Yes, thank you. And
Yeah.
thank you for having me. This was nice.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for agreeing to come and talk with me. This is the season finale for Brainstorm Black.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you agreed to come. I honor you, and I love this book, Freedom House, Poems by KB Brookins. Everybody needs to run out and get this book and read these poems. Thank you so much for being on my show. And yeah, I'm proud of you. I love what you've done. I love what you've given us. Okay?
Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you for this. This is an amazing series.
I love
really
doing it.
loved what I've watched online, so I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I need the encouragement. But I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back next year with more. So thank you. And we'll see you on the next episode of Brainstorm Black.